So the way I did it was I approached it from what is the least offensive, and when I say offensive, I mean like what's the least off-putting thing I can possibly say to this person to actually allow them to let me walk in their door.
Matt Woolley Podcast.
So today, I'm with the well-known and respected Donny Hubbard. Thank you for being here, Donny.
Thanks for having me.
So who is Donny Hubbard? Donny Hubbard is a husband and father. He's a man that's passionate about clothing with a long history of it. You've been a sales and buyer for Rainwaters, which is based in Fort Smith.
Correct.
You are the owner of the Bowman's Northwest Arkansas, the Independent Man in Northwest Arkansas. You were a buyer in sales for Rhodes in Louisville, Kentucky, and you're currently the owner of Hubbard Clothing, and you're heavily involved with Autism Involves Me charity and support group. Where'd you grow up?
Grew up in Los Angeles, California, suburb of LA called Covina.
Covina?
Yep. Was born in Fontana. Just wasn't where we lived. That's where the hospital was. The hospital group that we did it at, I guess. And I was born and raised in a little suburb of LA in LA County. And remember really liking it. Moved out of LA when I was 13 in 1989.
Okay, let's stop right there. So is that where your passion?
Nope.
For? Okay, no. It just happens to be. Okay. All right.
So, grandfather retired. My great-grandparents were still living in Van Buren, and he was the oldest of a bunch of kids, and so he was young enough. They were young enough when they had him that they were still living for a long time, so he wanted to be close to them. We were a super tight-knit family, so we all basically picked up, every one of us, my aunts, my uncles, my mom and dad, we all moved to Van Buren, and that's when I got to be an Arkansan.
Nice.
I people ask me all the time about, like, was it a horrible move or whatever? And I was a poor kid in L.A. and I was a poor kid in Van Buren. To me, it was both the same. It kind of didn't matter.
Right.
It actually changed our circumstances quite a bit because my parents were able to sell the house that we had in L.A. and buy a much nicer house.
Oh, of course.
So,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But, so the clothing thing, the first week we were in Arkansas, we attended a church. We were looking for a church as a family, and attended a church in Fort Smith, which is across the river from Van Buren. And there was a guy that was leading the scouting group at that church. It was a scouting group called Royal Rangers in the Assemblies of God, and the leader was a guy named Paul Rainwater. And I was 13 years old and completely enamored with this guy because he was well-spoken, super well-dressed, dynamic personality. And it didn't take me long to figure out, like, he wasn't super wealthy. His family owned a clothing store. And in my eyes, the ability to emulate someone with wealth was almost as good as having wealth. And so when I figured out what it was he was about and what they did, I really, really took a liking to that situation. And I remember thinking really early on, I may never be wealthy, but I can do that. I can sell clothes and I can talk to people. And so I just kind of sidled up to Paul and made him mentor me.
That is awesome. So give me the transition. I mean, you said you were 13 at the time. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So, I mean, how did that conversation start?
Yeah, so my brother and I were super involved in that scouting group, and that was what kind of drew us to that particular church. And Paul was actually involved with the national staff of the organization.
Oh, okay.
And so he was a public speaker, phenomenal public speaker, and he got invited to a lot of places with the group. And because of my involvement in the group and my love for Paul as my commander, I would just offer to go help him whenever he'd go to a camp and go do a speaking engagement. And so I traveled all over the country with him.
Oh, that's awesome.
All over the country with him.
What a great opportunity.
Yeah, it was great. And like just to get to hang out with the guy that I loved as a mentor. And yeah, we had so much fun along the way. And I pretty much grew up with this guy. I remember the first time, like as a 13-year-old kid, I didn't know anything about clothing. I mean, half of my clothes were homemade, like legitimately. And if they weren't homemade, they came from Kmart, not Walmart. We didn't know what Walmart was back then.
Walmart days, yeah.
And anyway, so I didn't know how to wear clothes. I didn't know why clothes were what they were. And I remember I was wearing a baseball cap one time, and I had it on the back of my head with my hair sticking out the front. This is early 90s. And Paul was pretty quick to tell me about, when I was making a mistake. But he was also equally as quick to tell me why. And I remember him throwing me a GQ magazine, and he said, there's an article in here about why baseball caps are what they are and how to wear them. And I was like, okay.
Note taken.
Yeah, exactly. So I remember reading the article, and like I was both super embarrassed, and at the same time, I was super intrigued by what it had to say and why it was what it was. And to this day, it drives me crazy when I see somebody wearing a baseball cap.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that meme of the guy he's in a baseball stadium, he's watching baseball, the sun is just beating down on his face, he's got his cap turned backwards, and he's sitting there doing this.
Amazing. Exactly.
It's only if we had something for that sun. Okay, so you stuck with him your entire basic high school?
Yeah, so he literally, I became part of his family. I mean, I went on family vacations with
So it sounds like he's probably been one of the most influential men in your life.
100%, yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so is this something did you start working at Rainwaters in high school? Or
Yeah, so when I was, I just graduated high school, and when I was 19, they had, it was a family business, and so there was the whole family, so mom and dad and two sons, Paul and Gail Rainwater. And they always had one other staff member that was full-time helping them out. And the guy that was helping them, he had been there for a long time, the whole time I'd known him. And he got offered another position somewhere else and left. And when he was exiting, Paul already knew he wanted to ask me to come work for him. But they actually asked, his name was Steve Nelson. They asked Steve, they said, just out of curiosity, is there anybody that you would recommend us to talk to? And he was like, the only person I can think of is Donny Hubbard. And I was only 19 at the time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so Paul calls me up, and I'll never forget the conversation. I was working at a bank and a restaurant. I was working two jobs, and didn't have caller ID. This is before cell phones. And my phone in my apartment rang, and he has a very distinct voice. I remember picking up the phone, and he goes, Donny. And I was like, yes. He goes, are you ready? I was like, it's about time. And that was the whole conversation. He's like, all right, be here on Monday.
That's awesome.
And got there, and
so what? I mean, what did you learn while you were there? I mean, obviously you had learned some stuff already. You had been mentored already, but did you?
Yeah, but I didn't know anything.
Dive into.
Yeah, I was reading Esquire and GQ, and checking out.
So tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so I get to Rainwaters, and it was pretty quick learning curve of listen to every single thing Paul says and just say the exact same words, because whatever he's doing seems to be working, right?
Right.
And so I literally would just be a parrot. I'd listen to what he said, and whenever I would have a client come in, I'd try to sell him the same things and say the same words, and it got to the point where he kind of cracked Paul up because he would listen to the things I was saying, and he's like, "You're saying the exact same things I'm saying." I'm like, it's working out well,
right, yeah.
And there was a great dynamic in the store with Paul and I and his brother Gail. We all got along pretty well, and I would say Paul and I were a little bit more into the relationship side of things. I really grasped at that point what could be great in the clothing business, and I was in school and wasn't ever much of a academic kind of guy. And I went to Paul and I was like, hey man, I want to do this. Like, this is what I want to do with my life. This is great. I envisioned myself like taking over their store at some point, which, it obviously did not end up being the deal. But he was like, I'm never going to tell you to drop out of school, but I will tell you that this doesn't necessarily require a degree. And I was like, enough said.
Yeah.
I don't recommend anybody else to do that. I want my kids to go to school, but it just wasn't for me. And I went the long way. I would say.
Me too.
Yeah. And it worked out.
Yeah.
Thank God. But I spent my time there, and I cherished every moment, and I found myself like really realizing that there was more than what that store offered. Because we're in Fort Smith, there's really only a certain level you can do in a town like Fort Smith. And that's when I was starting to date my wife, and I was feeling a little bit of the internal pressure of, all right, now you got to grow up and be a big boy, figure something else out. And my wife and I had gotten married, and I was still kind of looking around, and I stayed at Rainwaters for a couple of years after we got married. So 7.5 years in total was my time at Rainwaters. And I ended up asking Paul's permission because at the time I was a buyer with the store. I'd moved up through the ranks there, and I asked his permission to go to market and pass out resumes. And lo and behold, I walked into one of my friend's showrooms and handed him a resume and said, hey man, just in case anybody's looking, I'm interested in pretty much anything in the clothing industry. And about 10 minutes later, the guys from Bowman's, the owner from Bowman's, walked in, and it was after I left, and he was like, hey, are you guys looking for anybody in Arkansas? Like, there's a kid that lives in Northwest Arkansas, and he's great. And so next thing I know, I get a call from those guys.
So is Bowman's, I know they're based in Little Rock. I've seen your store in Little Rock. So are they, what's that footprint, or at least at the time?
Well, at the time, this was 2002 or 3, something like that. At the time, they were known in Little Rock, but not so much up here. And the owner was another great mentor, a guy named Wayne Radcliffe. He was another one of those super cool, dressed to the nines, had a real cool air about him. And he had really done a great job of building Bowman's and Little Rock up to be something very special. And I knew that they carried a lot of the brands that I'd read about in some magazines. And when he approached me, the intriguing part to me was that he wanted me to stay in Northwest Arkansas. And so he wanted me to be their outside sales guy for Northwest Arkansas as an extension of their store. And young Donnie, all I heard was, I don't have to go to work every day.
Sounds good.
Sounds great. Let's do this. And then regretted it pretty quickly because I realized about 3 months in, like, nobody was knocking on my door to buy clothes, right? So then it turned into, okay, now I have to figure out how to get people to buy clothes. And I was transitioning from a business where our highest end garment or item was, like $700 would be an expensive suit, to selling very, very expensive things all the way up to, again, this has been 20-something years ago, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 pieces. And so, best of the best, and so you're narrowing down your client list pretty quickly of who's actually going to be able to afford to buy that and who would want to buy that.
So it sounds like, based on knowing what I know, which this just may be ignorance talking, I'm not sure if this is accurate for those that are listening, but other than, I believe, Walker Brothers, which they're not really in that, they were kind of like Rainwaters, weren't they?
Yeah, back in the day.
That's right.
That's right.
And so you were kind of the first guy up here that's really pushing that attire. Am I correct in saying?
Yeah. I was definitely
You're
the
like
first
the guy.
luxury
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
For sure.
That's awesome.
And man, Walker Brothers, John Cole was so kind, and he tried to hire me early on, and it felt like more of a lateral move at the time, but it was super flattering. He's always been such a gentleman, such a great guy, and but yeah, as far as that high level of luxury goes, it was unique for me to be bringing what Bowman's was selling up here, and yeah, it was a fun experience. It was hard. It was a super hard experience. So for 3 years, I sold clothes out of my car, and I would. I remember about, like I said, 3 months into it, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I gotta figure this out and get my crap together and like figure out how to make this happen." And so back then, again, not that long ago, but long ago enough that we still were using phone books and landlines to.
I remember.
Yeah, to cold call, and I remember thinking, all right, I got to make 100 calls a day to try to get 10 appointments, and out of those 10 appointments, maybe I'll make 3 sales, and that was kind of the metrics, right, in my mind. So I would, and another thing was I wouldn't get dressed every day, and then I would eventually, like not too terribly long in, I'd start having people call me and be like, "Hey, you want to go grab lunch?" And I'm like, I haven't even taken a shower, And so I remember clicking in my mind, like, all right, this is a job. I got to treat this just like any other job. I turned a room in my house. I had an extra bedroom and turned it into like a miniature store in my house, just so I would feel like I was surrounded.
That's awesome.
I took all my try-on samples for custom clothing and all the things that I brought. So I would drive to Little Rock every Friday morning. And I would pick up a load of clothes for what few appointments I had for the week, and then the next Friday
commuting for the whole thing.
Yeah. So we had a Friday morning meeting every Friday morning at 9 o'clock. So I would leave here at 5 a.m., drive to the Friday morning meeting, bring everything up that I'd sold, reload, and then just do it again.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
And man, those guys hated me for being on time for that stupid meeting every Friday morning, because they lived in Little Rock, and if they walked in late, they'd be like, "Oh, sorry, traffic was terrible."
Yeah.
And Wayne would just turn and he'd look at me and be like, "Donnie drove 3.5 hours. He made it." I was like, sorry.
Yeah, you did take the excuses out of the room.
But so that was kind of how it went down, and it was tough. But I eventually people started calling me, and like I said, I was getting to back up. I would get dressed every morning like it was a job.
I got to stop right there and ask you. So you're talking. Let's speak to the entrepreneurs out there. You were saying you were making extensive, phone calls regularly. How that goes is, you make 100 phone calls. You said you might get 3.
Right.
In the beginning, how did you feel about that? That sales rejection, was it brutal, disheartening?
Growing up with Paul Rainwater as my mentor, I felt like anything would just roll off my back.
Really?
I didn't care. Yeah,
That's great.
So the way I did it was I approached it from what is the least offensive, and when I say offensive, I mean like what's the least off-putting thing I can possibly say to this person to actually allow them to let me walk in their door and do something. And so what I figured out was, and this is all kind of, sales 101, there's a gatekeeper, there's things you say, there's things you do, there's things you don't do. And so I would just go, of course I'm targeting like the usual suspects, doctors, attorneys, professionals. Like I would go through the phone book and like just start calling all the attorneys in the phone book. And it usually sounded something like, "Hey, my name is Donny Hubbard. This is what I do. This is who I'm with. I'm not asking for an appointment. I just like stop by, and I'm calling ahead of time to ask you if it's okay if I stop by and drop off a card and just introduce myself." And nobody said no, because they were like, "Oh, he's not really asking
Not
to
pushing anything.
nobody's being a
wants a
jerk to a
relationship.
guy. Yeah, nobody's being a jerk to a guy that's just saying, "Hey, I'd like to stop by and say hi. I don't want anything out of you, and I don't want to." So I made it a point. Like in my mind, I was like, I'm gonna on purpose leave this person wanting more. So I would purposefully not bring a single item in my car. Like there was no way I was going to allow somebody to waste their time with me when I didn't ask for the time up front. And so what I would do is I'd show up, and whatever time the secretary told me to come by and say hi, whatever, I'd show up and be like, "Hey, Donnie, I'm here, 2:00, whatever." Let's say, throwing out a name just because I know I can with this one, Steve Brooks. He was a new attorney at the time. I'd be like, "Hey, I'm here to see Steve Brooks. Donny Hubbard called a couple days ago. I just want to introduce myself, give him a card, and that's it." And so they would call him up and say Steve comes up to the front, and be like, "Hey, man, I just wanted to say hi, give you my card, and tell you what I do. And if there's ever anything I can do for you, I'd love to be the one to take care of you." And 9 times out of the 10, they would look at my card and be like, "Oh, well, what kind of stuff you got?" And I'm like, "I sell this, I sell that, I sell this." And be like, "You have anything in your car? Like, bring it in." And be like, "Oh, no, absolutely not." I'm like, "No, I didn't bring anything because we don't have an appointment for that, and I didn't want to assume anything or waste any of your time or mine." I was like, "So, yeah, I mean, if you want to set up a time, I would be more than happy to bring you some stuff to look at because, I'm not going to come unannounced."
Right.
And they would either totally appreciate it and be like, "Dude, absolutely, like, let's look at the calendar." Or they'd be like, "Oh, great, I'll call you back." And then maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. But there was never a point where they were like, "Oh, that guy was pushy," or, anything like
That's
that.
great.
So, yeah.
That's awesome. So, I got to ask this question. Do you still have some of these same guys, I assume?
Oh, yeah. That's
that
why I threw Steve's name out there. He's still
great.
with me. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. What a way to build up clientele. Okay, so how long did you do? Because I know you started out working with Bowman's, but then you eventually purchased Bowman's.
Yeah, so
Are you the Northwest Arkansas?
Specifically the Northwest Arkansas store. So after I did it for about 3 years, my wife found out she was pregnant with our first, Allie, and unfortunately my grandmother had just passed away, left my dad and my mom a little bit of money, and not a lot, but my dad offered to help me do something. And so I went to Wayne, and I told him, I was like, "Listen, I'm having a baby. I need something more, and the outside sales thing is tough. Like, I could do it, and I did really well at it, like shockingly well at it. And I said, but I need something that's a little bit more stable, and I'm willing to throw my own money into it. If you want to partner with me, let's open a Bowman's." And so from day one, I was an owner in the company. I was 25% at the time, and he point blank told me he was eventually that he was so impressed that I would offer to actually put my own money into it and to help do it. And
like skin in the game.
Yeah. He was like, "Great, let's do it." And so he provided the inventory. Shout out to Collins Haynes, God rest his soul. He gave me the space like for next to nothing.
Really?
He helped put me into business.
Where was this space at?
This is up on Horse Barn Road where whole dermatology is now. It was in an office building. It was real weird. And like, people would call me when they got there and be like, "Where's it at?" And I'd look out the window and be like, "Are you driving a silver BMW?" "Yes." I'm like, "You're here." "But where?" I mean, it was that hard to find it. We still did great business.
That's awesome.
But so I partnered with him to open Bowman's Northwest. And then a few years in, the dreaded 2008 crisis happened. And for me, it wasn't that bad because Walmart actually did well, and this community was like a bubble. It kind of always is. And people were still shopping, and we were very small, right? Like, so we're talking about 900 square foot store where we were doing, just a little bit of business. We didn't really change. Little Rock was a problem. because that was a big business and a lot of inventory and a lot of people, and they were down 20%, 25%.
Oh, wow.
So it was a big deal. So at that point, Wayne came to me and he basically said, paraphrasing, if you're ever going to buy the store, now it's the best time to do it because I'm going to give you the best deal you're ever going to get, and I need the cash. And so I immediately started like trying to find the financing to do it, and had a few people lined up, different circumstances and different people who all were very, very kind and willing to jump in. But then randomly, as fate would have it, I walked into the grand opening of Silver Joe's Coffee Company. And one of my clients had been a partner in Silver Joe's, and so he was there. And he had known my mom forever. My mom was family nurse, and his family nurse in Fort Smith. And he, of course, like I said, he was a client anyway, and saw me, and I was like, "Hey, man, we need to put coffee in the store." And he was like, "That's a great idea." I said, "We'll promote your brand, and we'll get free coffee. It'd be great." And so he's like, "I'll come over afterwards." Because, again, he was a client. He knew where we were. And so he came in, and he's like, "What do you want to do?" And I was like, "Oh, we can clear off that counter back there and put Silver Joe's coffee and blah, blah, blah." He goes, No, I get that." He goes, "But what do you want to do with this?" Because it was, at the time, it was in a tiny space. I was like, well,
now that you mention it.
yes, now that you mention it, I'm in the process of buying the place, and I want to do this. And even back then, this is a while back. This is 2008, 9. I was like, I'd love to take over the space next door and put in a barbershop, and I'd love to have a little lounge and all these things, right? And he's like, "I dig it. I'd like to help you do it." And I was like, "Huh?" He goes, I think we could help each other. He said, I like the space. I like you. You've always taken great care of me. I like your mom. We have history. I'd like to help you do this." And I was like, "Oh, kind of already have that taken care of." It was a couple other guys were in the process. He's like, "Well, I'd be willing to do X, Y, and Z and help you do this. Let me know if
Change your mind.
change your mind." And so I literally went back to the other. I won't name any of those guys. They're great friends and great clients still. But I went back to those guys and I was like, "Hey, listen, I got this opportunity with Steve Clark, and seems to be a really great guy."
Now, was he still? Yeah, he was still doing, because they were still doing
Rockfish.
Yeah.
And all the guys that were interested in helping me, like, they were like, "Donny, listen, dude, we like you and we believe in you. Only willing to give you what I'm willing to lose, and be happy to do it. But if somebody else can help you, like, grow this thing more and is willing to, then no hard feelings whatsoever." And again, like I said, everybody's still clients. And I was like, "Huh, okay." So I went back to Steve, and like,
Rest is history.
yeah, we bought Bowman's in Northwest, and we kept the name Bowman's for a while, and we kind of worked in conjunction with them until felt like it was time to make a change, and that's when we changed the name to the Independent.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I've been in your store multiple times over the years. Actually, when I first met you, you were when Design Steins first started. And it sounds like you were just kicking up Bowman's as well, so that's pretty wild. I think I've known you, I was thinking about this, I think I've known you for 15 or 16 years now.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Sounds right.
That's crazy.
And I'm fairly certain you redesigned our second website.
Yeah, we did. We have a history together, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I actually helped you with some Bowman stuff, too.
Yep.
And it's a fun story. I always remember the first time we met you, because we were... Again, so speaking to the entrepreneurs here, nothing was beyond us. Can you do that? Well, certainly. We do that all day long.
Yeah. What about this? Can you do that?
I've been doing that for years now. But I just dropped by. I did kind of the same method you were talking about. Just dropping in and say, hey, here's some stuff. And I can't remember your assistant at the time. I remember I'm trying to remember her name, but it doesn't matter anyway. So I dropped some stuff off, got probably 20 feet out the door. Hey, dude, come back here. And the next thing you know, we were doing business with Bowman's. And then, yeah, there's been a lot of good times over the years. Yeah, so
Heck yeah.
let's talk about we've still got some time. There's so much I want to ask you, but we can only do it in an hour. All right, so tell me. I want to talk about the hurdles of being in business.
Sure.
So, I leave this stuff very open-ended because usually a few things pop in your head.
Yeah, no, listen, I think it's part of the whole story, too. Like, from the independent, it was a new partnership, and there was a couple of us involved, and we didn't see completely eye to eye on a couple of things, and it ended up, it was rough in the beginning, and I think when you have a partnership where you have some ups and downs and falling outs, whenever you can get past all of that, and I'm skipping way ahead, but it just really solidifies the fact that you're in the right partnership, because when each party can humble themselves and point out their own mistakes and say they're sorry and
work beyond the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it just makes you even closer and stronger. And to this day, I mean, I whether he listens to this or not, I think Steve knows I take a bullet for him. And people ask me all the time, you going to buy his part out? And I'm like, why would I, man? I have the best business partner there is.
He's a great guy. I've had the opportunity of meeting him several times. I've met him in the Bowman stage and got to talk with him during the independent, and of course seen him several times since you guys did the thing with Hubbard's. And he's a great guy.
Part of that was us dissolving the independent. Part of that. Oh man, we made the mistake of trying to open a store in Little Rock with some of the former Bowman's guys. Huge mistake, just for a lot of reasons. And
what lessons did that teach you? In a nutshell,
less is more. Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome.
One done really well is way better than two or three that are bootstrapped, right? So that's definitely.
I have that's great. I love hearing that because I had the same thing happen with us years ago when we were first starting to see success in the early days of Design Science. I thought, well, we've got this successful model here. Yeah, we can just replicate something different in the same way. And we opened up. We won't get into the details, but opened up another company. And it did all right. I mean, we weren't going broke on it, but I woke up one day and I said, "Man, I've got these two things. There's only one Donny.
Yep.
There's only one Matt. Even with your partners, you're still stretched thin in the things that you do." And I realized, you know what? If I just put all of our effort into what we know is a proven success, that tree is going to grow a lot stronger. And so
I will say this: there is only one Donny, but I got two more pretty dang close Donnies. Like my guys are.
Oh yeah, absolutely,
the best.
Absolutely, 100%. But I think that speaks to the younger Donny who is still kind of finding his way in business. You know what I mean? Yeah. When I say that, because man, when we talk about training nowadays, or I'm just having an understanding of the business, your understanding right now is so much greater than it was.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and listen, dude, like when we closed the independent, that was there was so much going on with the economy, with the partnership, with I had just gotten an autism diagnosis on my little boy. We were navigating that.
A lot of storms.
It was crazy. And I was being recruited because, to find a young guy, and I was relatively young. Still like to think I am in this industry. But at the time, I was the youngest luxury store owner who built it myself and wasn't given by somebody else, right? I built that out of...
You started...
I started it here. And so for me to be as young as I was and have the experience that I had and being an owner and a buyer and just all those things and understanding that entire business, it was very appealing to some legacy stores out there and Rhodes in Louisville, Kentucky. I struck up a great friendship with one of the owners there, and they were recruiting me pretty hard. And with everything else going on, and the autism diagnosis, and you know, I literally just got to a point where I was like, man, maybe going to a bigger market and doing my thing. And there was some ownership opportunity promised on that end, and
looks like you're looking for a change.
Yeah. Well, more than just looking for a change, it was how can I best help my family? Like maybe a bigger city's better for my son with autism services, and you know, just all of those things. So there wasn't one decision that led us to Rhodes. It wasn't like they offered me like a ton more money. In fact, they offered me less money to come. And so what I was betting on was on the back end, you know, maybe ownership, maybe, you know, like whatever that looked like. So I went to Rhodes literally making a lot less money than I was making here. But the opportunities for autism care, a change for my family, just all those things, it was good. And our time in Louisville, amazing. We love that town. Love the people in Louisville. Like if we hadn't had kids, and I'm saying this not like we didn't want to have kids,
Right.
But we would have never left. It was the coolest, best experience. Like so many great people, and we still have great relationships. We went to Derby multiple times, like all of that.
That's great.
But at the end of the day, my wife walked in 6 months in and set a positive pregnancy test down in front of me, and I came to the fast realization that we had a third grader, my daughter, who wasn't real excited about Louisville schools. My little boy with autism, who, yes, we were in a bigger city and a bigger market, and they had a lot more services, but he was on 2.5-year waiting list minimum for any of those services. Didn't really take that into account. And then now we got a third one on the way. We got a kid with autism. We got no family, no friends. We're going to have a baby. Like, the store thing was great, but not really what I thought it was going to be. Again, making a lot less money living in Louisville kind of thing. And it was expensive to live there, as you can imagine.
Right. So
I did all the math, and the math turned into, we got to go home. And again, so much credit where it's due. One of my very first phone calls was to Steve Clark, and I said, hey, man, I'm having a baby, and I'm coming home. And he's like, I only have one request. And I was like, what's that? He goes, you allow me to help you do it.
That's awesome.
Like, you're a freaking saint, man.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Just awesome. The best dude in the world.
That's fantastic. And so then the beginnings of Hubbard Clothing came about.
Yeah, I've never been a big... So the reason I changed the name from Bowman's to the Independent is because I didn't want to put my name on it. I always felt like that was a little bit too ego-driven, and I wanted it to be more ambiguous, right? Matt, we need to talk. And so... no, I just, at the time, I was like, I don't want to put my name on it. What if I want to sell it? What if I, like, it's just all this stuff. And then coming home, I wasn't gone long enough that anybody forgot about me. I just wanted, when talking it over with Steve, I was like, what are we going to call it? And he said, ma'am, I think you need to let them know exactly who and what it is. And I was like, Hubbard Clothing it is. Because it just says who and what. And turns out a lot of people like the name for a clothing store.
It is.
In the industry. A lot of people are like, oh, no, it's a great clothing store name.
It's classic. It's got a classic ring to it. An old world charm, too.
Yep. And that's what we wanted out of the logo. And, I wanted it to feel like luxury, classic.
It does.
That kind of thing.
It does. Well, and I think you've earned your reputation in Northwest Arkansas as far as a local, as far as a local move is concerned, that's exactly what you needed to do, because the guy that started the industry in this area for luxury clothing, it just makes sense. So what for people that don't know Hubbard Clothing, what is Hubbard Clothing?
That's a good question, because it's just evolved so much. When we started the store, I knew first and foremost luxury menswear. Not by design, but more by just passion. It became predominantly Italian. Travel to Italy twice a year to go buy product, and I've got a lot of great relationships over there, and spend some time trying to find unique things that make our store special. But from the get-go, I knew I wanted to be... There were a few parameters for opening the store. One of them was obviously the clothing. That's what pays the bills. Another thing I wanted was for it to be very art-centric. I grew up with an art background, and I thought when I was going to go to college that I was going to be an art major.
So you had Goddard design the store, didn't you?
I had Chris Goddard Design Group. I engaged him and told him, I said, I want it to be art-centric. I want it to be luxury. I want it to be mensy, but not cheesy mensy. That dude knows how to hit the nail on the head. He's a mad scientist.
I don't think I've ever seen anyone
disappointed with what he did.
Right.
No. And so I told him I wanted it to be art-centric, but I don't know really how we put art on the walls. With being a clothing store, we need clothing on the walls. I wanted a barbershop because I wanted like a whole experience, right? Like, and when I was opening a store, people weren't really like talking experiential selling, right? I'm not that I invented that. I'm not saying that. It's just, it wasn't like a buzzword like it is now. So I felt it was fun to be on the front end of that. And then, there was always a spot in the store where people would hang out. So I wanted to like turn that into something really special. So I told Chris I wanted a room in the back that was more or less a bar, but lockers where clients can keep their own booze and whatever, hang out, use it for meeting space, workspace, however they want to use it.
I love how it transitions too, because it's like, seriously, it's a hard, but it works though.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's such a wonderful space.
So with the focus being all things gentlemanly and clothing, and Chris came up with a great idea to do cloud ceilings with the art on the ceilings, and to do portraits of men throughout the ages, which I thought was so cool. And that's become a shtick for us too. In all of our spaces, we have art on the ceilings of portraits of men. And the barbershop has been a home run now that we got it right. We got the right guy in there, and doing great services. And my partner Steve said it perfectly in the beginning. He said, let's give guys many reasons to come to one space, whether it's grooming, whether it's clothing, whether it's relationship, whether it's having a bourbon in the back, or meeting a business meeting in the back, or cigars on the patio, like whatever that is. Let's give them a lot of reasons to come one space, and let's get them to stick around for more than 10 minutes. And that's what we did effectively, is we gave people a reason to come in and hang out and stay and get groomed, look around. And it's been really fun.
Very inviting. Yeah. So let's talk about clothing now. This is a very loaded question. Summarize what is luxury clothing to Donny Hubbard. And do you have any favorite brands that you'd like to point out? I know you know a lot. You've had just about every major brand in your store.
Yeah. The reality, it's not just objective. I mean, luxury clothing is clothing that it exceeds a certain price point, right? And just because it exceeds a price point doesn't make it nice. The things that make clothing nice is the quality of the fabrics, the quality construction, the brand reputation. I think it's very easy to look at something and know if it's quality or not. But there are particular brands out there that have built a reputation that you don't have to look at it, and you don't have to. I mean, you just know from their reputation what you're dealing with and why it costs what it costs. Because if you're in my shoes, you kind of know those stories, right? And it's our job to tell the story to the client, right? I constantly am telling my guys, Caleb and Seth, and I don't have to anymore. They know this stuff. But if we have a product and we have a story to tell about the product, then it creates an emotional attachment with the client. And then it's so much easier to sell something that has a story than to sell a widget because it's a widget, right? We don't sell white shirts because they're white shirts. We sell the right white shirt, right? And we have a reason for selling that shirt, and here's the story behind that product, right? And so for me, my favorite brands are the brands that I have personal connections to, like, for example, Maurizio Baldassari. That's a brand that started off as just a couple sport coats showing in a showroom where I was buying another collection. And I met Renato Baldassari, Maurizio's son, and I was just immediately like kindred spirits. This guy, I could call him a friend from day one. And then we developed a really, really, really great relationship where the reason I started traveling to Italy was because Baldassari invited me and my partner to their dinner in Tuscany at their villa. And I was like, not going to miss that.
Absolutely not.
And it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience I've gotten to experience about 10 times, which is
that's fantastic.
Over the top. Just one of the coolest things. But through those years, they've developed an amazing collection. And, you know, to get to do business with a product that is so beautiful and that is so nice and people that are so kind and so wonderful, like that's just like cherry on top, right? It's the sweetener that makes it that much better to sell a product where you know the people and you know how wonderful they are and what a great product it is. And then you can tell people about that story. Right?
What's it like seeing it firsthand over in Italy?
It's life-changing.
Really?
It's life-changing. Yeah, it's like when you go to Italy for the first couple of times and you see the way that Italian men dress and live and actually do, like, it makes you feel bad for Americans. Like we are missing everything here. I don't know, man. It's a way of life. You know, again, like I'll just touch on Baldassari. Like the family is still a tight-knit family, and they value that, and they value like their business and the products that they produce, and they value us as their clients and friends. And you know, I'll say I have probably a closer relationship with that family than is specifically Renato, Maurizio's son, than a lot of other accounts do, I would say, just because of, like, I don't know, like I said, we hit it off and we've been great friends ever since. But yeah, it's just more fun that way. It's a different experience being there and understanding like why their clothing is special, and it has a particular look to it, and it's because it's designed around their daily life in Brera, and Brera is a district in Milan. It's cool.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
So, do you have any advice for those that are, you know, trying to become a sharp dresser like Donny Hubbard? What would you say to guys that need more fashion sense in their life? Like me, Donny.
Yeah, like you.
Don't be hating, Donny.
No.
You dress me up sometime.
Sometimes. Very nice jacket today.
Yeah.
Listen, I think if somebody's interested, and we have a mutual great friend, Byron.
Yes.
He was not that big into clothing. He wasn't that interested. He came in, he per your recommendation, and he just wanted to learn more about it. And I think when you start getting interested in clothing and learning more about how to dress and why you should, and it doesn't take long for you to buy something nice and wear it, and for guys to start getting compliments. And we're simple beings, man. Dudes like compliments, especially when it's from the opposite sex.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And yeah, I think the advice is, if you're interested, figure out what your budget is, go look at stuff that's way outside your budget and understand why it costs what it costs, and then kind of be aspirational, but know what your budget is, and let people know right up front. Let guys like me know exactly what you're looking for. We'll push you. We'll try to get you to stretch that a little bit, just to give you a little bit more enjoyment out of what you're doing. Because in our eyes, candidly, if you tell us your budget is this, we know it's really 20% more, and it's not because we're trying to squeeze more money out of you. We're trying to get you to buy something a little bit better that even if it's less numbers, if you buy a little bit better, I think you're going to enjoy what you get out of it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs out there, like overall in business? If you had to summarize,
find a good mentor. Find somebody who's willing to invest in you. I think there's a lot of rhetoric about falling down and getting up, and God knows I've done that plenty of times and probably do it some more. But yeah, I don't know, man. I think the most valuable thing to me was finding people who believed in me and mentored me and were willing to, like I said, I asked Paul before I ever went and took my resume, and he was kind enough to, candidly, and I don't care who's listening to this, back then, he was like, the answer is yes, absolutely. I love you, man. I want to see you do well, but don't ever tell my family that I gave you my permission. I was like, I got it. He goes, because I will lie and say that I did not.
That's awesome. Okay, so I want to switch gears to about a serious topic that that's affected your family, and is affecting the nation. So you have a son that is autistic.
Yep.
So would you like to speak about that?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah, so we figured out pretty early on that there were a few signs with Luke when he was a baby. My wife's an educator, so she has a master's degree in early childhood development.
Okay.
And I remember her seeing a few things in him that she was uncomfortable with, and it was developmental steps, maybe in a dude. I'm just working my guts out trying to pay for everything.
All right.
I don't know, is he supposed to be looking this way or doing this thing? And so I was the opposite of a lot of dads for whatever reason in that world. A lot of dads end up being in denial, and it's very detrimental for early intervention. I remember her saying when he was about 18 months, she was like, he's not doing this. Doctor keeps on throwing out developmentally delayed. What do you think about going to a speech or a therapy clinic like speech and occupational and physical therapy? And I was like, hey, listen, if you think that's going to help, like, I don't know how it could hurt. Right. So I was very open to the fact that, like, I don't care. Like, I don't feel like I'm doing anything wrong. And I not everybody's like that, and I don't mean to put everybody in a bubble as far as like dads who have kids with special needs.
There's some truth in that.
But I feel like there's a lot of denial because you end up dealing with a situation where there's a mourning of a loss of what you thought your kid was gonna be, right? It's a clinical thing. You mourn the death of the child that you thought you had, right?
Oof. I don't think I've ever heard it worded that way. That's
because when you get dealt that diagnosis, it changes the perception of everything that you wanted for your son or daughter, and they become a different person in your mind. And it's a mind job. There's no doubt about it. And you have to look at it from the perspective of what the reality is and what are the wonderful aspects of that reality, right? And so what we got out of it, and it's funny, there was a picture taken of my son when he was about 3 years old, maybe, running through a church gymnasium, and they had, like this church had all the fruits of the Spirit painted on the walls real big. And it just so happened, this picture, he'd always rise with his hands flailing in the air like a crazy person. Right behind him, running in this picture, he's got the biggest smile on his face. It says the word joy.
It's awesome.
It perfectly describes him, right? He's just joy, and he's always happy. Unless he's not, then that's terrible. For the most part, he's always happy.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, we're seeing more of the autism in place, statistically. So, you've been there and done this, still doing it. So, what advice do you have for parents out there and for loved ones that?
So that's a good question, and for me personally, I'm not going to answer for everybody in general. Here's the advice I would give if somebody was coming to me and had a kid with had just been diagnosed with autism. My personal thoughts on the issue of why it's prevalent now. I think it's a mixture of a lot of things. I think it's environmental. And by environmental, I think there's just so much different garbage in our food now. And I'm not a hippie weirdo. I don't.
Oh, I'm the same way. I mean, there's something to be said for the intake.
If you want to go back to like me being a nut about Italy, I don't know if you know this or not, but half of our food is illegal in Italy.
Oh, I know.
It's illegal. You can't have genetically modified grains. You can't have pesticides. You can't have, it is illegal to import our food to Italy. And so when you talk about and this is getting off on a whole another thing. But
this is another 2 hours of discussion. Blue
zones and where people live to be over 100. And so Italy has a lot of them.
Oh, yeah.
Because they've protected their food. When you walk in a grocery store, you smell food rotting. The fruit is rotting because they don't allow you to put anything like preservatives or you smell what it should smell like in a market, and it doesn't look like ours where we spray it with wax to make it shiny. It's literally what happens.
It is just from the tree
or the ground, And so I think environmentally we're putting a lot of stuff in our bodies that we just don't know how to not do because it's just so prevalent, right? I think that's part of it. I think part of it is genetic. I think part of it is just unfortunate. Do I think that shots cause autism? I mean, no, I don't, but maybe, I don't know. On that topic, I'll jump in there and say as there is evidence for it that has pointed to some of that, but it can be multiple causes. Yeah, I think there are vaccine injuries, absolutely. Yeah. But I don't think 100% of autism is caused by vaccines. No. I think a lot of people need a culprit. They need something to point a finger at. So they have to have something to latch onto. And going back to my advice is I would worry less about who the devil is and worry more about how you're going to help your kid have a happy and successful life, whatever that looks like for your kid, right? So for me, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about why did it happen? How did it happen? Who can I blame? Who can I sue? Who can I, that's never been in my mind. In my mind, it's how can I make his life better and how can he make my life better? And how can we enjoy him and he enjoy us? That's awesome. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, last question for today, Mr. Hubbard. All right. What gives Donny Hubbard joy? Oh, man, a lot of things. Listen, dude, I'll jump right out to the front with my kids. That's an easy one. Obviously, it's cliche, but it is true. Sure. There's nothing better than having coffee in the morning with my daughter, and she's just the most special, well-adjusted 17-year-old girl you've ever met in your life. I can genuinely say that out of everything I've done wrong, that's one of the few things I've done extremely right. I cannot say enough good things about my daughter. Lukey, he just turned 14 last week.
Wow, where does the time go?
I know. He's the happiest he's ever been in his life. He just started junior high, and you'd think he has a special needs bus that picks him up every morning, drops him off, and you'd think he was jumping on the bus to go to Disneyland every day.
That's awesome.
It's the greatest thing ever. And then our 7-year-old little boy, Andrew, I named him after a friend of mine, and one of my best friends in the industry, a guy named Andrew Weisbrod. We've been so close for so long, and I like to honor relationships, like and like my son Luke is named after one of my very, very close friends, and the same thing with Andrew. He's named after one of my best buddies. And it wasn't even until after we named him that I went and looked up what the name meant. And the funny thing is Luke's name means giver of light.
Oh, wow.
And it's so apt. Mm-hmm. And then Andrew's name means strong in body and strong in mind. And
that's awesome.
It is shocking because this kid is crazy. And I mean, everybody thinks their kid's a genius. I get it. Mm-hmm. This dude's wild. He's awesome. Off the charts. Like he's shockingly smart and just so funny and fun and handsome, and I'm not sure he appreciates having a brother with autism the way we appreciate having a son with autism. He calls him that guy a lot.
That's awesome.
One of these days he'll get there.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Donny, I can't think of a better way to end the podcast. I want to thank you for coming on.
Yeah, man. No, thank you for having me.
Appreciate you.
For sure.
You come again?
I will.
All right. Thank you, sir.
You bet.